Hey guys, this is Tyler here. It is December here in Estonia, and I'm going to discuss here a topic, and this is I've personally experienced, and I think many other guys that have lived abroad, and this is something that all guys should realize, especially ones that are moving abroad, and realize that this could happen to you, and it as it does with many guys, and that's that you'll likely not live in the first country that you relocate to. That won't be the country that you stay long term in if you move abroad. This is something I think many guys don't realize when they're seeking out a country to live, and they're in that relocation phase. They often don't realize that country they'll probably eventually leave, and sometimes they'll leave within like the first few months. Many guys don't realize that often what you see and what you perceive through like media and through photos and videos is very different than what you actually experience when you go there firsthand. And this is very much the case when you're living abroad. You'll often perceive the country in a very different way than it actually is once you experience it firsthand. And also, you may realize there's another country that's a much better alternative that could be nearby or very far away. It just depends. Like in my case, for example, I thought for certain in my teens, my late teens, that I would live in South America long term. I was going to live in Chile. I was actually looking at what I needed to obtain like a Chilean residency, permanent residency, after I had completed my studies there. And I was already looking into that when I was like 18, 19 years old. Once I went to Chile at age 20, and then I spent a couple of years there, I realized after my first year, I knew I was not going to want to stay there long term. It wasn't for me. That type of country long term wasn't going to work. And I realized how dumb it was for me to have gone through the whole process of figuring out what I would have needed to be a long-term resident there, and even to try to get like citizenship. It was just insane. So South America was very much like the place I thought I was going to be. And then after I lived there, I realized, firstly, the South America I perceived before I went there was quite different when I actually then went there. And then after I went there and lived there, the mindset of being there short term to long term then started to sink in. And I realized I did not want to be in Chile long term. It just, for me, it wasn't going to work. Honestly, when I left Chile, I still remember the day I left. One of the few places, honestly, that I've been long term, even on a trip, where I was actually kind of happy when I left. When I got on the plane and left Santiago and the 10-hour flight back, it was actually, I was relatively happy, honestly, that I was going back to the States at that point. And mind you, that was a different time. I mean, the economy, obviously there wasn't any such term as a lockdown. The economy had really started recovering from the 08-09 crisis, and I knew I could probably get a job pretty quickly when I got back. Now, it was a little more of a struggle than I realized when I got back, but eventually, after I was back for about 7 months, I eventually did land what was a very good job. I came back, and I realized after being back there that I was much better suited for Eastern Europe. I did not know the Eastern European country that was for me. Initially, I was thinking it was Poland, and then I was leaning more towards Ukraine, and then eventually more towards Russia, and also the Baltics. But the main thing, though, that I learned from this is that when I set my sights on a place, before you've ever lived somewhere, like in a foreign country, if you haven't been through the experience, you haven't been through the whole transition phase and the whole newness factor of living in a foreign country, it really helps your perspective evolve, and it makes it, you have a better idea of what to look for in a country if you do relocate again, and the kind of things that you have to look at short-term versus long-term, because it's very different ideals when you're looking at a place short-term versus long-term, and even more so a place that may be very nice on a vacation could be very unpleasant if you go and live there. And this is a really important factor. Now, for example, you may be think that it's really fun and cool being a novelty in a foreign country. When I lived in South America, like Chile, I was very much a novelty. I was like the white gringo, like from North America. I was still young at the time, and I looked young for my age. I was like a novelty there, and for good and bad. And over time, though, I got tired of being a novelty. I didn't like it. I did not like the feeling, and that was one of the things I actually got really worn out of, and why I was actually happy to leave, because it does actually impact many other areas of life. When you're looked at as such a novelty, it does start to impact other areas of professional, personal, daily life. And I got tired of that. And so I knew when I went to Eastern Europe, I wasn't going to stand out as much as a novelty. Yeah, maybe a little. I mean, on the basis that I was foreign, of course, but my parents certainly had a heritage that wasn't that far from this part of the world. So I kind of knew that I wasn't going to stand out in that way. And I actually preferred that, because I would rather be out on the street just passing by people and stuff. And like here in Estonia, most people, they don't know that I'm foreign. Unless I start speaking to them, then they know, of course. But that's how I prefer it. Now, some people are different. Some guys like being the novelty. They like kind of being looked at in that light, and they don't tire out of it. I, on the other hand, I'm not like that. I prefer to at least blend in a bit. I don't mind being a little bit of a novelty, just not a lot. That's how it is for me, and it's something you do realize when you're in that place. I think guys who live in Southeast Asia, who live in Latin America, can testify to this, that it really is different being looked at as a novelty compared to being looked at as just a local person or something similar to a local person. There's also other factors that you may have to contend with, what may cause you to look at a second country and a third country as an option. Because I'll say this, of the people that I've known personally, most guys that have lived outside their home country for at least 5 years or longer are usually living in their second or third country. It's not usually their first country. It's very unusual for me to encounter someone where that's the case. Usually only in the case where the person has been married to someone, a native of that specific country. In that case, yes. But in many others, it's not like that. In many times, it's actually like my situation, where they go from one continent to the other, or one side of the continent to the other side of the continent. That's very common in my experience in encounters with people. And many guys may here know that it's quite common, the progression that guys go from South in Latin America to Eastern Europe. That's a very common kind of transition, a transitory point. And there's, of course, various reasons for this. One of the common things that guys have told me, I obviously do consultations, they get tired of, for example, who live in Latin America. This isn't as bad in Southeast Asia for some reason, but in Latin America, many guys have told me that they were seeking relationships, and maybe they could find someone, but the overall level of intelligence or interest in more intelligent areas was kind of low in the respective country they were in. And so for that matter, or for that reason, they were much more appealed to Eastern Europe, because those kind of topics would interest many more Eastern European women than Latin women in general. Of course, there's always exceptions to that. And those are the kind of things, as you live longer in a country, you appreciate more and you value more. Because if you're just in a country, you're spending a few weeks at a beachside resort and you're just partying it up, you're not going to be getting into those kind of things. And then if there may be other day-to-day tasks that you have to deal with, and that could be very problematic in the Latin country that you're living, or that the guy's living in, and then they start to realize that it's a little different living somewhere in vacation mode compared to a long-term mindset. And this is one of the big things I've noticed, for example, having lived in South America and Chile compared to living in Eastern Europe. I always tell this to people, is that when you live in South America, I lived in Chile and Argentina, the mindset is, the life revolves around the party. At least that's how it was when I was there. This was in 2013 and 2014. It was all about the party mode. And now, on the other hand, in Eastern Europe, life is more about the day-to-day grind. It's about kind of getting stuff done day in and day out. It's more about the work. And this party mindset kind of goes into the backseat. It doesn't really, it's not as important. So in this sense, it's more like where I came from, the Rust Belt of US, I think very much is more similar to what I see in Eastern Europe. And this is kind of the same here. And it's different when you live in a place, it may seem really cool and idyllic being in a place where it's like party mode, like every week for months at a time. But after a while, actually, you get kind of tired of it. You get fed up with it. You'd rather just live like maybe the lifestyle that people typically live in Eastern Europe. Now, the other thing also to remember is that lifestyle, that's going to affect interpersonal relationships, and it will affect you may create very good friendships from it. Absolutely. In terms of finding a good partner or a good relationship with a woman, that may be a big problem, because when you're in a country where there's a lot of partying and fiestas, it can be a big issue when it comes to women, because they obviously are at those parties constantly, and the likelihood that infidelity takes place is much higher. And also, if you're not into that lifestyle and whatnot, you just want to chill at home, do kind of your own thing, be low key, that's often not going to work in some of the Latin American countries. That's just not the mindset, and especially for a foreign guy, because you're not really going to be attracting the same type of woman that you'd probably attract as a local guy there. Maybe for a local guy that would work, but not as much for a foreign guy. Now, other situations obviously that happen is that maybe someone can't get a residency, or they can't get a passport. That may be why they were originally living in that country, and then understand that it's very unlikely, so they have to find an alternative country to relocate. This is very common, because people often, I've known of people in my personal life, they are told one thing, they'll get a long-term residency document, they get there, everything's in order, and then the government tells them, no, we can't do this for you for some reason. Obviously, then you're a bit limited, and you may begin to think another country is better. In this kind of situation, it can be very troubling, and often with these people, they question, is this a country they should live in? It starts going into deeper issues, and often in this case, they will look elsewhere, because they need a country where yes means yes, and that's how it is. So in this case, these guys often will find a secondary option where they can live long term. And the other thing too is that what happens with some guys, like, they don't want to be like in a travel mentality, or they don't want to be traveling between country A and country B constantly, or country A, B, and C. For some guys, this trifecta method that Andrew Henderson from Nomad Capitalist talks about, it works just fine. For other guys, they don't want to do that. That is not them. My brother, for example, he likes to remain long-term in one country. He does not like to move around. I'm also pretty much the same way. I don't want to move around. For me, I won't travel to the US if I don't have to. I prefer just remaining in one base, doing my day-to-day work and living my life in that place. If I don't like the place to be there 95 or 98% of the time, I wouldn't be living there. Where some guys, so they want to live basically in two different countries at the same time, or they want to be constantly traveling back to another country. In this case also, the guy may realize that maybe they should go somewhere else, because if they can't handle living there 98% of the time, maybe this isn't very practical. I think during this whole world crisis, there were a lot of guys that realized they didn't really like the countries they were living in. They saw the harshest side of the country with the whole epidemic, and realized they did not like this. And I always tell people, live in a country when it's at its worst point. Utilize this to really get an idea of what the country's about. Don't look at it when it's at its best point. Look at it at its worst. Many guys didn't realize that. They didn't like it. I read about many guys who were living in Philippines and Colombia and all over the world, and they were all going back to their home countries because they just couldn't live there like 100% of the time or 98% of the time. They had to be going from one country to the next. To live in that country permanently is unfathomable for some of these guys. I think some guys are back in their home countries and others are looking at other alternatives where they can actually picture themselves long term. And this is why when you look at a country, it all depends on the guy and the needs that they have. For one person, it may be completely different to the needs of another person. I mean, some guys have families, they need a lot of social services, they need a lot of other support systems of the country, whereas other guys don't need any of it. They can live without any kind of government support or any kind of heavy amount of social welfare, and they're just fine in this case. And that's why it all goes back to the same thing as of what your needs are. And it really just boils down to this, is that if you don't like a country, if you arrive somewhere within the first 6 months, if you don't see yourself there long term, you're probably not going to like it more over time. It's not going to get better. Some people think if you give it more time, it will improve. I don't think so. I think often you'll know within the first 6 months. If you really don't like it, it's probably not going to get better, and look somewhere else, because there's probably a better country out there. There may be a better country that offers better dating or just a better lifestyle that you're seeking, or better bang for your buck. Prices are better. You have to seek that country out. Don't just remain in a place. If you're discontented from the beginning, it's probably not going to improve. Just like a relationship, it's probably going to get worse. And that's what I've learned in the several years I've lived abroad. So give me your feedback here, and thank you.